When masked men snatched his daughter, the nanny didn't hesitate. She stepped between death and innocence. But the world watched what the billionaire did after, and that moment would shatter every illusion about power, race, and love. Before the cameras, before the comments, before the boardrooms learned how to cry, there was a morning that smelled like lemon polish and warm toast. The Hollister estate began its day the way a museum wakes, slowly, with lights sliding over curated objects. The house had a silence that made every noise feel like a trespass. The tick of the grandfather clock, the low hum of a hidden appliance, the brief, unapproved joy of a 6-year-old's giggle ricocheting off a marble foyer. "Miss Ellie." Lila's voice carried from the corridor, like a bird forgetting the cage. "You promised pancakes shaped like stars." Eleanor Brooks, 42, hair wrapped in a navy scarf that matched the veins of the marble, held a batter bowl in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other. She bent to Lila's height and held the spoon between them like a secret microphone. "Star pancakes," she intoned, by special request of Princess Lila, ruler of the sunroom, doodler-in-chief, and expert in sticky situations. Lila beamed. "Sticky because syrup." "Sticky because love," Eleanor corrected, tapping Lila's nose with the spoon and leaving a pail that the child squealed to wipe with her sleeve. Across the kitchen, a sous chef looked up briefly, then back to his chopping. The estate staff had learned to make space for the peculiar gravity between these two. Eleanor was not a mother here, not on paper. But in the spaces where paper ended, in the bedtime songs, in the socks that found their pairs, in the fear that slept in a child's chest, Eleanor had always been more than the job description. "Your father's in his study," Eleanor said, turning another star on the griddle. "He has a call with the people who dress like the Monopoly man." Lila scrunched her nose. "Top hats. Top hats, little queen. Which means we must be extra quiet when we deliver breakfast." From down the hall, the study doors were closed, the glass frosted. Behind the frosted glass, the billionaire breathed in emails. Grant Hollister, 47, had the careful look of a man who had traded sleep for proximity to the future. His jaw was a slash, his hair disciplined to a fault. He wore a white shirt that never seemed to wrinkle, even under the weight of numbers. His late wife's portrait watched him from above the fireplace. Camille, caught mid-laugh, a soft-handed woman whose absence had done something brutal to the air in this house. Grief had settled like dust no staff had license to wipe away. And so much of Grant's life in the last 2 years had been about architecture. Building walls high enough that emotion couldn't climb them, building schedules tight enough that memory couldn't find a window. "Grant," a voice on the speaker crackled, "if we push the launch to Q3, our valuation—" "I don't push," he said without looking at the portrait. "I pull." The house intercom clicked and Eleanor's voice, always careful in that channel, said, "Mr. Hollister, Lila's breakfast is ready. We'll keep the tray in the kitchen so you're not disturbed." He hesitated. He could say come in. He could say bring it. He could say I'll be there. His tongue was a tight knot. "Fine," he said. Silence. Eleanor did not answer. "Yes, sir." Just let the silence snip the string. In the kitchen, she exhaled twice. Lila watched her carefully the way children watch people who keep promises for a living. Eleanor didn't sigh around Lila unless she could turn it into a song. "How many stars make a sky?" Eleanor asked, plating the pancakes. "5, Lila said confidently. "Then we'll give him 7. So he has a sky and 2 wishes." "Why 2? 1 to use, 1 to keep." "Do you have wishes?" A pause, then a smile that remembered its own cost. "All the time." The morning had its ritual. Eleanor tied Lila's shoes while narrating the weather like a bedtime story in reverse. "Today the sky will wear a pale blue dress with white lace clouds along the edge, and the wind will gossip in the trees, but not too loud. Will Daddy come to the park with us?" Lila asked, lifting her foot and lining her small sneaker with Eleanor's palm. "He has a call with the Monopoly men," Eleanor said, the joke light, but the truth heavy. "But he knows about the park. He approved it on the calendar." She kept her tone lyrical. Children don't need the weight of adult disappointments, not when they carry their own small thunder. Lila looked toward the frosted glass doors. Her face did a complicated thing that 6-year-olds don't have names for. "Okay." The state gates opened to a day that pretended nothing bad had ever happened. The sun had the gall to be warm. Birds had the audacity to sing. A security SUV followed at a polite distance as Eleanor drove the nondescript sedan to the park because wealth likes its distance and its protection to match. Eleanor Park turned and gathered a braid from Lila's hair to tuck behind the ear. Rules. Stay where you can see me. Use my inside voice for strangers. If a dog is big, ask before petting. And if something feels wrong, run to you and scream. Louder. Scream. Louder. Scream. Heads turned. Eleanor winked. Perfect. They did swings first because Lila believed flight should come before any other sport. Eleanor pushed gently and counted each arc as if each number polished a piece of the day. 1 for the moon, 2 for the sun, 3 for the stories we ain't told no one. A jogger slowed nearby, smiling. A teenage boy filmed the sky with his phone, angling for a bird he'd probably only see later when editing. A bench creaked as an old couple traded a thermos of tea. On the 4th push, Lila twisted to look back. Do you think Mama can see me from heaven? The question came like rain and sunlight, unexpected at different temperature. Eleanor's hands softened on the swing chain. She always gave this answer the same way, each time an act of devotion. Yes, baby. And she is very impressed with your form. Lila laughed, and the laugh was a ribbon. It was a good morning, and the thing about good mornings is they never know who's waiting around the corner. Across the park, a black SUV paused at a stop sign a beat too long. In the driver's seat, a man with a face a camera would forget check to text, turned off his engine, slipped the phone into the cup holder. 2 more men sat in the back. They were overdressed for a park and underdressed for being decent. Masks in a duffel. A map printed and marked with a red X near the duck pond, because competence can coexist with moral bankruptcy. It happens many ways and always the same way. A canvas life, a predictable ritual, a gap between the assumption of safety and the reality of the world's appetite. Eleanor had a way of feeling wrongness like a breeze under a closed door. She felt it now, not as a sound or a sight, but as a displacement, a fox passing through the garden beneath belief. Time to draw, she asked Lila, steering them toward the picnic table where crayons waited in a neat row. I want to see your castle with the crooked tower. Every castle needs a crooked, Lila said, as if the grammar had been chosen just for poetry. They were 10 minutes into their drawing, a sun with too many rays and a stick person with a smile too wide for its face, when Eleanor noticed the men. They weren't looking at the playground, they were looking for a crack in the day. The first one approached on a diagonal, phone to his ear, pretending to laugh. The second drifted left, the third right. They were less obvious than a storm, more obvious than they wanted to be. Fear arrived like a cold finger at the base of Eleanor's neck. She had been afraid before. She knew the shape of it. She knew, too, that the body has options. Fight, flight, freeze. She had chosen wrongly once years ago, in a different city, with a different girl not her own, and she'd sworn never to choose wrongly again. Eleanor's fear was a sharpened thing that knew what it would do. Lila, she said softly, remember our game? The statue game. Yes. Show me your statue. Lila went very still, face bright, as if this were only play. The first man assessed the scene and changed his course. Excuse me, he said, voice sweetened with the sugar substitute of performance. Do you know where the bathrooms are? Behind you, Eleanor said without moving her eyes from Lila's drawing. Her heart did something like a drumline in her throat. Past the gazebo. He glanced. Oh, must have missed them. He smiled at Lila. Hey, that's beautiful. What's your, Lila? Eleanor said evenly, never taking her gaze off the page. Hand me your drawing. The girl slid it across the picnic table, and Eleanor tucked it into her tote with one slow, practiced motion. She stood. We're headed home. Wait, his hand moved, not toward them, but in a signal, and the other 2 men adjusted their angles like wolves remembering the choreography of hunger. Eyes met. Something dropped from the air. The teenage boy lifted his phone out of habit, not understanding why the hairs on his neck were rising. Run, Eleanor said. She did not say run to who. She did not have time to say run to me. She was already moving, placing herself between the girl and the men, body a hinge that slammed the door. The first man reached, and Eleanor's forearm knocked his wrist up with a crack that surprised even her. The second lunge for Lila's ponytail, Eleanor's palm shot forward, open-handed, catching his throat at the notch, not to hurt, but to interrupt breath, attention, intention. The third reached into the duffel. Don't you touch her. Eleanor's voice was not polite, not trained, not flattened for a boss's comfort. It was the voice the ancestors kept for moments like this, the voice you don't get unless the world has made you earn it. Lila ran where she had been trained, toward an old woman at the bench, toward the thermos and the sensible shoes. "Help! Police!" the jogger shouted, words already leaving his mouth as he dialed. "There's a kidnapping." The first man recovered, a flash of anger under his skin. "Lady, move." "No, move." No, she didn't have weapons, she had width. She widened herself. Shoulders squared, stance braced, elbows flared. She had no shield, she became one. The one with the bag moved again. Eleanor grabbed it, she yanked back, and the strap broke with a sound like a belt being pulled too fast. The contents spilled, mask, tape, a syringe that hit the pavement and rolled toward the bench. The old man kicked it away, just as Lila reached his wife. The old woman wrapped the child with the good arms of someone who'd lifted grandchildren out of trouble before it had a name. "Call the police." The teenage boy's voice cracked. "Phone up, recording, because that's what you do now. You draw your sword for truth, and it looks like a rectangle." The first man slapped Eleanor, open-palmed, a noise that smudged the edges of reality. Her head snapped to the side, the scarf shifted, hairpins losing anchors. For a moment, the world showed her a field of static, then it resolved into the urgent present. She tasted metal. She did not move. "You don't want to do this," she said. "You don't know what I want," he hissed. "I know you can't have her." It wasn't a line, it was a fact. He swung again, but she saw it this time, and stepped in, reducing his leverage, feeling the biomechanics of a body that had learned to carve vegetables and carry sleeping children, and clean stairs large enough to make thighs burn. She planted, and he bounced off. Sirens were a distant idea becoming a near promise. "Abort!" the driver shouted from the SUV, panic flooding the plan. "Go, go!" The third man grabbed the duffel from the ground, and the second cursed, and the first made one last lunge because men like this hate, leaving without the thing they imagined they deserved. He reached for Lila again, and Eleanor did not think. She became an instruction. She stepped into him, and felt the ugly intimacy of impact. A knee connected with her hip, an elbow with her ribs. There are moments the body catalogs for later, to make sense of how it keeps going. This would be one. She took a blow she would feel for weeks, and she held him just long enough for the old woman to shift Lila behind the bench, just long enough for the sirens to turn the corner from possibility into presence. The men scattered, retreating to their SUV, the driver already reversing, the vehicle fishtailing in fury and fear. Tires squealed. A license plate half memorized. The teenage boy's camera shook but stayed pointed. The jogger shouted details in real time into his phone, like a play-by-play announcer for the apocalypse. Eleanor staggered 2 steps, and then sat down all at once. The world tilted, then rebalanced. Lila broke free from the old woman and ran to her, tears and salt and little fingers. "Miss Ellie." Eleanor looked at her, eyes clear as a bell's note. "You did good, baby. You did perfect." She pressed a shaking kiss to the child's hairline, the space that always smelled like warm corn tortillas and shampoo. The first police car arrived, then a second, sirens making the air brake and reseal. Officers fanned out, hands on holsters in reflexive choreography. People pointed. The jogger pointed. The teenage boy offered his phone like a sacrament. The old couple talked in overlapping sentences. "Ma'am, are you injured?" an officer asked, voice too loud because he couldn't hear his own comm. Eleanor put a hand to the side of her head and looked at the red that came away. She blinked at it the way you look at a stranger who says your name. Pain was a thing she would meet in a minute. "I'm okay, Shalit." "She's okay." Lila crawled into her lap and made herself small the way children can still do before the world talks them out of it. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the girl and let her body be the wall, even now, especially now. "Do you need an ambulance?" another officer asked. "Yes," the old woman said. "Yes, she does." Eleanor would have said no. She would have said save it for someone who needs it more. But the old woman had lived long enough to know you call care by its name, because sometimes that's the only way it comes. The officer's radio crackled, words like coordinates and chase, and heading north. The SUV was already a vanishing problem. The immediate problem was a woman bleeding and a child shaking. "Miss Ellie," Lila whispered into the curve of Eleanor's throat, the place that keeps secrets. "I was brave, but my brave feels tired." "Brave can sleep," Eleanor said, and something in that line trembled like a bridge, but held. The EMTs arrived, soft hands and efficient questions. Someone wrapped a blanket around Lila. Someone shined a light into Eleanor's pupils. Someone asked for her name, and she gave it, and then asked for the girls, and she gave that, too, like a prayer and a promise. By the time the ambulance doors closed, the teenage boy had uploaded his footage. The internet had not seen it yet, but it would. The world was already on its way to the park, like a flock of crows, to a shiny thing. A thing that was more than shiny. A thing that pried a lid off something people pretend stays shut. Back at the estate, the intercom hissed, and a security employee's voice came through warped with urgency. "Sir? Mr. Hollister? You need to come to the security room." Grant frowned at the glass, at himself reflected faintly, at the portrait above the fireplace. "What is it?" "Sir, there was an incident at the park." "What kind of Lila is safe?" The words stumbled over each other to get out first and failed. "Thanks to Ms. Brooks. We have live feeds from city cameras. Sir, please." He ran. He didn't know he could still do that in this house, didn't know his legs remembered long strides, didn't know his own fear would propel him past the careful pieces of art as if they had always been in the way. The security room was a glowing cave, screens blinking 100 small skies. A tech scrubbed backward on a traffic camera until the black SUV swam into view like a shark near the surface. Another pulled up a shaky cell video. Grant saw Lila's yellow jacket. He saw Eleanor's navy scarf, saw her body become a barrier, saw a hand raise and a head snap, and a child run, and strangers move toward, and the men move away, and sirens arrive. And where are they now? His voice sounded wrong, too thin and too loud, the voice of a man whose money could tilt any room, but couldn't tilt this one. The ambulance headed to St. Gabriel's, the head of security said. "Your daughter is uninjured, sir." "My daughter," he repeated, not as a correction, but as a sentence he needed to try on again, to feel where it pinched or fit. "I'll drive," the security chief said. No, Grant stopped. "Yes. You drive. Now." On the way to the hospital, the car was too quiet for a man whose life had always been full of noise. He looked at his hands and saw a future in which they would never feel clean. He saw his late wife's eyes in the rearview, not metaphorically but literally, in a photograph clipped to a visor by hands that weren't his, Eleanor's hands, probably once, making sure Lila could look at her mother's face on the way to and from school. At a red light, a social feed on the security chief's dash chimed. A clip was gaining views in real time. 9,000, 11,000, 13,000, 21,000. The title was blunt in the way headlines are when the truth refuses literature. Nanny saves billionaire's kid from kidnappers. The security chief moved to turn it off. Grant stopped him. "No. Let it play." The image was shaky, the sound worse. But the shape of it, the geometry of one person making herself into a wall, was perfect in its own terrible way. Grant watched a version of his life, in which he didn't appear until the last frame. He watched the woman he paid to keep her head down lifted and get hit for that audacity. He watched the person he had hired to complete a function refuse to be a function. He watched the world almost take his child, and watched someone he had never truly seen put herself between danger and his daughter, like the world had been built for this pose and this purpose. He felt sick. He felt grateful in a way that knelt before something sacred. He felt something else, too, something he did not yet have a name for, something that would either transform him or ruin him if he pretended it wasn't there. "Sir." The security chief's voice reached for him like a rope. "We're here." Hospitals smell like disinfectant and apology. St. Gabriel's foyer was a cathedral of bland concern. Grant walked through its doors like a man arriving at a courtroom for a trial he hadn't known he was on. "Lila Hollister," he said to the receptionist, and his voice broke in the middle, a twig snapping under a boot, small but real. "Second floor. Pediatrics." "She's with an EMT," and the receptionist checked her screen. "Eleanor Brooks." "Thank you." He took the stairs because waiting for an elevator felt like a sin. On the second floor, he found a small room with a big chair and a quiet miracle. His daughter's face in real life, not on a monitor, not in a shared photo album, not in memory's cheap copy. Lila sat with a blanket around her, hair messy, eyes red, cheeks damp, teddy bear from the EMT crooked under her arm. When she saw him, her mouth did another complicated child thing. It tried to smile but remembered the rules of fear and tried to cry, and then chose both. "Daddy." She launched off the chair, a little body forgetting physics, and hit his torso with the force of 1,000 tiny gravities. His arms wrapped around her, as if they'd never learned how they'd forgotten. "I'm here," he said into her hair, into the place where Eleanor had placed her kiss. "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." "Miss Ellie was a shield," Lila babbled, words tumbling, "and the men were bad, and the old lady was good, and the police go woo-woo, and Miss Ellie got a red on her head, but she said I did perfect, and I did," and Grant's eyes went over Lila's shoulder to the figure in the bed. Eleanor sat propped against white pillows, a bandage at her hairline, the navy scarf folded like a patient thing on the tray, next to a styrofoam cup of water she hadn't yet lifted. Her eyes were calm in the way water is calm when a storm is thinking about leaving. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student in trouble, not unkindly, but unwilling to lie. "Miss Brooks," he said. His voice decided to be formal out of habit, and he hated it immediately. "Mr. Hollister." She touched Lila's shoulder. "Tell your daddy about the statue game." Lila pulled back enough to look up. "I did statue, and then I did run, and then I did scream. Miss Ellie says that's brave." "That's the bravest," Grant said, and realized the sentence had weight because Eleanor was watching to see if he would lift it. A doctor appeared, all brisk angles and empathetic eyebrows. "Mr. Hollister, your daughter's vitals are good. Slight shock response, which is normal. We'll want her to rest. Ms. Brooks sustained a mild concussion. We're keeping her a few hours for observation." "Is she okay?" Grant asked, the grammar unfit to hold the size of a question. "She's okay," the doctor confirmed. "Lucky both of them." Grant stepped closer to Eleanor's bed. He wanted to say many things. "Thank you like a small child. I'm sorry like a man in court. Are you hurt like he had hands he could place on the wound?" Instead, he said, "I saw the video." "I figured," she said, tone not unkind, just true. "The world sees everything faster than the people in it." He winced. "I should have been there." Eleanor did not rescue him. "Yes." Silence opened a small mouth, wanting to be fed. Finally, he found a fragment of usefulness. "Is there anything you need?" She shook her head once, winced at the movement, and then considered. "Lila will pretend she's okay until night comes. That's when it will happen again in her head. She'll need arms then. Not money. Arms." He felt the sentence as an indictment and an invitation. "She'll have them." Eleanor blinked like she'd put a coin in a slot machine and wasn't sure how to react when something valuable actually clinked out. Lila reached for Eleanor's hand with the stubbornness of someone who knows where safety lives. A small brown hand, a small lighter brown hand, a grip with a 1,000-year lineage. Eleanor's fingers made the return journey, squeezing back. "Do you want me to call your mother?" Grant asked, remembering a file, an emergency contact, a name, Miss Ruth. He had not met her. He had not made that part of his world the way it should have been. "She knows," Eleanor said. "She knows when something's wrong. But a call would be nice." She recited the number without looking at the chart. "Tell her it's a bump, not a break." "I'll call," he said. He stepped into the hall and dialed. The voice on the other end was warm rust. "This is Ruth." "Miss Ruth," he began, feeling the strangeness of saying her name with less distance. "This is Grant Hollister." A small, polite silence. He imagined her sitting at a kitchen table he had never seen, a mug balanced between thumb and forefinger, something cooling. "What did my child do?" she asked, the question shaped like a mother's worry and pride. "She saved mine," he said. The words took something from him, and gave him something, too. They rimmed his eyes with salt. "She saved Lila at the park. He stopped. She's at St. Gabriel's. They're keeping her for observation. She has a concussion." Miss Ruth exhaled a prayer that sounded like an instruction to the universe. "And the baby?" "She's okay." He swallowed. "She needs arms." Miss Ruth chuckled softly, a sound full of 1,000 Sundays. "Yes, that'll do it." "I can send a car. I'll catch a bus," she said. "Don't worry your money. Worry your heart." He closed his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." When he hung up, he stayed in the hall a moment longer, palms against the cool paint, forehead following. Somewhere down the corridor, a vending machine released a coil with a metallic groan and freed a packet of chips into an expectant hand. Life kept doing small, ordinary things even when the large, extraordinary things tried to swallow it whole. Back in the room, Lila was telling Eleanor about the drawing. "The castle had a crooked tower because every castle needs a crooked," she repeated solemnly. "That's true," Eleanor said. "Straight things break too easy." Grant sat in the visitor chair, the guest in a story he had paid to avoid starring in. He watched Lila's fingers fuss with the edge of her blanket. He watched Eleanor manage pain like a polite acquaintance at church, acknowledge, nod, do not invite to dinner. He cleared his throat. "Eleanor, Ms. Brooks," he tried again. "Eleanor, I want to, thank you felt too small. I'm sorry felt too late." He found a different path. "I want to change some things. At the house. In my life." He didn't know why he was saying this now, except that people tell the truth when the world makes them. Her eyes held his. "Then start with tonight." Tonight. Read to her. She likes voices that make the words move. And when the lights are off and she says she's fine, remember that sometimes kids lie to keep the adults from falling apart. He nodded, the lesson landing in a place that had been empty too long. The door opened, and a nurse came in with a clipboard and a good face. Ms. Brooks, we'll need to keep you a few hours, then you're free to go if you have someone to watch you tonight. Concussions can be tricky. I'll stay with her, Grant said immediately, before he knew he was going to say it. He looked at Eleanor. If you'll let me. Eleanor's smile was small and private, like a candle lighting a corner of a room without telling the whole house. She'll like that. She looked at him for a beat longer. And I will, too. He felt a constellation of shame and gratitude arrange itself in his chest. He felt the hook of the morning. The nanny didn't hesitate, catch on his ribs and tug in both directions, toward the past where he'd outsource love, and toward a future where maybe he wouldn't. On the ride home that evening, because yes, he brought them home when the doctor cleared Eleanor, because yes, he strapped Lila in the back seat himself like a man relearning a ritual. Grant drove with both hands on the wheel. The sun was lowering, the city gold-tinted and tired. He glanced in the rear view. Lila half-dozed with her head against Eleanor's arm. Eleanor looked out the window with the alertness of a night shift nurse hearing someone cough 2 rooms over. Daddy, Lila murmured, not fully awake, not fully asleep. If you had been there, would you have been a shield, too? The question made something in the car flicker. The truth wanted out. The lie made a case for itself. The new man he wanted to be opened his mouth before the old one could. I don't know, he said. He could feel Eleanor's eyes on the side of his face, not judging, just witnessing. But I will be. Now. From now on. Lila's hand found Eleanor's, and then reached for his sleeve, little fingers grabbing fabric like a lifeline. He drove home with a child and a promise attached to him. The estate greeted them with its usual theatrical understatement. Lights warmed as if the house had been waiting with candles staged in every room. The staff stood at a careful distance, relief tightening their faces into polite shapes. The sous chef had made soup. The house manager had turned down the beds. Somewhere, a vacuum cleaner slept. Upstairs, Eleanor said softly, the general disguised as a nanny. Bath for Lila like it's ordinary. 2 toys, not 7. The green towel because it smells like laundry day. Then jelly on toast because she'll say she's not hungry and she's lying. Grant blinked at the suddenness of his instruction and found he appreciated it more than any spreadsheet he'd ever made. Yes, he said, and a second later, thank you. In the bathroom, steam ribboned off the water as he tested it with his wrist the way Eleanor had shown him once, half joking, half serious. He had thought he'd never need to know it. He'd been wrong. Lila sat in the tub and made a small ocean for the yellow duck to cross. Quack, she narrated, subdued but present. When a tiny panic stirred behind her eyes, it was Eleanor's voice she used to settle it. Statue game, she told the duck. Then run. Then scream. Grant knelt on the bath mat, jeans catching a reprimand from water because he was not a man designed to kneel in jeans. And if you need arms, he asked, the line a careful bridge back to earlier. You and Miss Ellie, Lila said as if obviously. Both. He nodded and swallowed something that tasted like humility and salt. After, he wrapped her in the green towel, inhaled the warm clean laundry smell like a drug. He put jelly on toast and watched her try to refuse and then give in. He changed her into pajamas, the blue ones with the stars, because a child who asks for star pancakes is a child who believes in consistency. He read aloud from the book with the bear who gets lost and then found, and when the words wanted to wobble, he steadied them with breath because Eleanor was right. She liked voices that made the words move. Down the hall, in the guest room, they had made for Eleanor fresh sheets, extra pillows, a glass of water on the nightstand. Miss Ruth arrived, her presence filling the space with a gravity that corrected orbit. She was shorter than Eleanor and somehow taller, hair silver like a crown no one had had to make. Grant met her at the foot of the stairs and offered a hand he didn't know how to offer without making it weird. She took it in both of hers. Thank you for calling, she said before he could. Thank you for letting me in. He nodded, throat tight. Thank you for raising someone who would put herself, he couldn't say between death and innocence aloud. He gestured instead, a helpless, unbillionairish motion that asked forgiveness from the air. Miss Ruth looked past him, toward the hallway where the child's bedroom door was open an inch. Her voice softened with a dangerous tenderness. That girl is loved by God and by stubborn women. You can add your love to that pile. She turned her gaze back to him. But don't try to replace the work already done. Do yours. He felt the instruction lodge itself somewhere permanent. Yes, ma'am. Later, when Lila slept, they all reconvened in the living room, because Shock hates being alone. Miss Ruth made tea in Eleanor's favorite mug, because of course she had one in this house, though he had never known. He sat opposite them, and watched a mother examine her child the way you inventory a treasure after a burglary, finger by finger, breath by breath. Hurts? Miss Ruth asked, touching Eleanor's bandage with a ghost of a finger. Only when I think about it, Eleanor said. Then after a beat, and when I don't. Grant spoke into his folded hands. The police will handle the rest. He stopped. He'd almost said I'll make sure they pay, and he didn't know any more if that was the right sentence. We'll keep her safe. Miss Ruth's eyes were kind and unsparing. Safety is not just locks and cameras. It's presence. It's truth. It's the thing you do after the thing you didn't do. He felt the hook again, the one from the morning that had split the day in two, and this time he named it. The world watched what I did after. He let the words sit between them, ugly and exact. I don't know what the world will think of it, but I know what my daughter will remember. Eleanor lifted her cup, sipped, and closed her eyes at the warmth, as if drinking something that had been earned. She opened them and looked at him, the gaze not hostile, not humble, just even. Then let's give her something worth remembering. They sat in the soft pool of lamplight while the night leaned its shoulder against the windows. Somewhere in the city, the video climbed toward virality, thumbs tapping, eyes widening, comments loading, judgments forming like clouds that might or might not rain. In the quiet room, 3 adults made a small agreement with their hearts, to be shields, to be arms, to be words that moved. Close to midnight, Eleanor stood, swayed, then steadied. I'll go check on her. I'll come, Grant said. Miss Ruth waved them off with a look that said, go together if you're going to learn. They walked the hallway like a procession of 3, Eleanor, Grant, and the kind of silence that tells the truth, until they reached Lila's door. Inside, the child slept with one hand outside the blanket, fingers crooked in invitation and claim. Eleanor tucked the hand back under and stepped away, but Lila's eyelids fluttered. Miss Ellie, she murmured, you're here. I'm here, baby. Daddy. I'm here. His voice found the register of vow. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Lila exhaled, and her breath smoothed the sheet. The room settled. The house listened. Eleanor stood in the doorway and let herself lean against the jamb. She was tired in the way people who lay down their bodies for someone else's future get tired, deep bone, soul level, the kind of tired that's also a kind of light. Grant looked at her profile, the bandage stark against brown skin, the scarf folded neatly over her shoulder like a flag after a battle. Eleanor, he said, low enough not to wake the child, there aren't words. There are, she said, not unkind. Most people just don't use them. He nodded once, and for once he didn't try to buy anything with gratitude. He didn't make an offer. He didn't promise a wing in a hospital or a check with too many zeros. He promised something he could actually deliver. Tomorrow, he said, breakfast together. The 3 of us. Eleanor's mouth softened. Star pancakes. He swallowed a small laugh, surprised to find it had survived. 7 stars. A sky and 2 wishes. She tilted her head, acknowledging a man who was trying, really trying. Make it 8, she said, for the crooked. They stood at the threshold of the small room where love slept, and in the quiet, the morning's hook echoed again. Not from a screen, not from a common thread, but from the bone-deep place where stories set their hooks. When masked men snatched his daughter, the nanny didn't hesitate. She stepped between death and innocence. The second sentence trembled there, unspoken and undeniable, asking to be answered now by actions, not explanations. What the billionaire did after would shatter every illusion about power, race, and love. By dawn, the park video had a life of its own. It had learned to walk across timelines, to crawl under captions, to borrow bold fonts it hadn't earned. It moved from the teenage boy's trembling hand to a stranger's stitched duet to a local news anchor's careful voice. It learned to travel with a title, Nanny Saves Billionaire's Daughter. It learned to travel with a question, where was the father? And then it learned to divide. The Hollister estate woke to the sound of 1,000 phones ringing inside pockets. Staff whispered in corners, faces lit by blue light, their whispers becoming opinions, their opinions looking for someone to tell them whether they were safe. Eleanor woke to the other kind of ringing, the ache at the back of her skull, with a bell inside it. Concussions write their own music. She sat at the edge of the guest bed, the house too soft for someone who had slept her life on practical sheets. Outside her door, tiny feet pattered. Lila paused like a rabbit, then peeked in. "Miss Ellie? Are you awake?" Eleanor smiled around the pane. "I'm awake, baby." Lila slid in and curled like the letter C, fitting herself to Eleanor's side as if punctuation could become shelter. "The internet loves you," she said solemnly, and it was almost funny except that it wasn't. Eleanor brushed a coil from the girl's forehead. "The internet is moody like a cat. Today it purrs, tomorrow it claws." She put a finger under Lila's chin. "What matters is you're here. Are you okay?" "I had a bad dream," Lila whispered. "But then Daddy came and read again. Twice. And he didn't look at his phone once." "Good," Eleanor said, and her smile did a tired, proud thing. "He can learn." Downstairs, the house manager had set the kitchen like a stage. Bowls, syrup, a whisk. Grant stood at the stove in a crisp shirt and an apron he did not own, sleeves rolled up like a man who wanted to convince himself his hands could do other work. He concentrated on pancake batter as if the right ratio could hold the day together. Eleanor walked in with Lila and paused. The sight of Grant, famous in circles for wielding power like weather, studying a star-shaped cookie cutter, made the air tilt. He looked up. Their eyes met. No one said, "How's your head?" or "How's your soul?" He gestured with the spatula. "7 stars," he said. Then, catching himself, 8. For the crooked. Eleanor took the whisk. "You're learning quickly, Mr. Hollister." "Grant," he said, "please." A smallness passed between them, the good kind, the way people make themselves smaller to fit into a room together, not to erase themselves, but to make space. Lila climbed onto the stool, with ceremony. "I am the ruler of the sunroom, and I decree that the first star belongs to Miss Ellie." Grant slid a batter star into the pan. It sizzled and puffed like a modest miracle. "As the father of the sunroom citizen, I concur." They ate. Lila narrated jelly physics. Eleanor provided syrup moderation. Grant watched the two of them, like someone studying a language he should have learned years ago. Halfway through breakfast, his phone vibrated with a tectonic urgency. He looked at it, then at them, then made a decision, and faced the two humans instead. The house manager, sensing a shifting weather pattern, appeared in the doorway. "Sir, your communications team is here. They've brought a plan." "Of course they have," Grant said, but the words didn't quite fit the mouth that had said, "I will be here" last night. Eleanor squeezed Lila's shoulder. "Eat your second star, princess." Lila's eyes searched Eleanor's face. "You're staying, right?" Eleanor tilted her head. "As long as I'm needed. And as long as I'm wanted." Grant saw the qualifier for what it was. He nodded once silently, and then went to meet the people whose job was to turn messy life into neat messaging. The communications team had colonized the den, wires and ring lights sprouting like invasive species. A screen showed the video paused at the exact frame where Eleanor planted her feet. The image of her body blocking a man's path was now the wallpaper of the day. Claire, head of PR, the kind of woman whose hair never got invited to weather, stood with a tablet. "We're at 12.4 million views across platforms," she said without looking up. "Shield Nanny is trending higher." "Of course it is," Grant said, and the sarcasm tasted stale even to him. Claire swiped. "The narrative is bifurcating. One thread hails Ms. Brooks as a hero. The other thread uses her heroism to indict you. If we act quickly, we can merge these threads into a single, manageable narrative." "Manageable," he echoed. He looked at the paused image. "She saved my daughter. Manage that." Claire didn't flinch. She'd managed disasters with more teeth. Here's the draft statement. She read without asking permission. "We are deeply grateful to our beloved family member and employee, Miss Eleanor Brooks, whose quick actions protected our daughter. The Hollister family values." "Stop," Grant said. The word was a flat stone thrown into a creek. It didn't skip. It just sank. Claire stopped. "Beloved family member and employee." "It's language that constructs intimacy while reinforcing." "I know what it constructs," he said. "It constructs ownership." Her eyes flicked up, assessing. She could smell something different in him, something that might ruin a day or save a life. "Then how would you like to proceed?" He looked at the video, not at her. "We proceed by listening to what Eleanor wants." Claire's jaw tightened only slightly. "We can extend an invitation for her to join you for an interview. It will humanize." "No interviews," a voice said at the door. They turned. Eleanor stood there, Lila behind one leg like a sailor behind a mast. Eleanor had changed into the kind of clothes you wear when you're going to tell the truth. Clean, simple, unafraid. "I'm not going on TV for you," she said, and there was no snarl, only a boundary. "I'm not going to hold your hand while the world decides whether to forgive you for being busy. I did my job, and then I did more than my job because love doesn't stop where the paycheck ends." Claire opened her mouth and closed it. This was not a focus group, this was a person. Eleanor looked at Grant. "If something needs to be said, you say it. You were not there. You will be now. End of statement." Grant absorbed the strike and found that it did not shatter him. It clarified him. "Understood," he said. And then to Claire, "Draft me 3 sentences. No adjectives I haven't earned. No beloved. No employee like a chain. We say thank you. We say I wasn't there. We say I will be." Claire's fingers moved fast. "We also need to instruct staff on how to respond to press inquiries. And there's another issue." She turned the tablet. A screenshot from a morning show. 2 hosts discussing the park footage with the sort of urgent concern that pairs well with ad breaks. Across the bottom, "Is she being paid enough to risk her life?" "I don't want my salary on TV," Eleanor said, jaw set. "You don't have to share it," Claire said, almost gentle. "But people will ask. They'll speculate. They will use your earnings as a morality metric." "They will. I won't," Eleanor said. "I won't be your case study or your PR cudgel." Claire nodded slowly. "Then we hold the line." Lila tugged Eleanor's shirt. "What's a cudgel?" "A stick you hit people with," Eleanor murmured. "We don't like them." Grant straightened. "Claire, tell security. No one comes through the gate without explicit approval. If the press is camped outside, you bring them water and tell them to leave. They're human. We treat them like it." Claire made a note. "What about interviews you might want to do?" "I don't know yet," he said, which would have been a surprising sentence coming out of his mouth yesterday. "Give me a day that isn't a knife." The internet did what it does. It praised, scrolled, litigated, refreshed, burned, cooled, discovered, forgot, remembered, wept, and memed. Threads braided themselves into ropes that could pull or hang. There were reaction videos with tears. There were reaction videos with jokes. There were comment sections with poetry disguised as anger, and comment sections with anger disguised as civic duty. The narratives chose their colors. In one corner of the digital room, "She's a hero. Pay her. Protect her. Honor her." In another, "This is what domestic workers do every day. Stop calling it love to avoid calling it labor." In another, "If a billionaire can't keep his own child safe, what does that tell you about the illusion of gated communities?" And in a shadowy corner where usernames were new and profile pictures were flags, "Why is this about race? She just did her job." Another opportunist trying to get famous. He owes her nothing. She signed up for risk. Eleanor did not go online. She made tea. She spoke with Miss Ruth about the bus ride home last night and about the soup, too fancy, Miss Ruth said, and not enough salt. She sat in Lila's room and taught her a new game involving counting freckles. She stayed. Grant, however, had the unfortunate habit of looking. He scrolled until his thumb ached, hunting for absolution or guidance in pixels that could not give either. He found one post by a woman named Araceli, a domestic worker in a different city, who wrote, "We risk our bodies because there are children in our arms. Stop calling it our nature. Call it your dependency." The line landed like a curriculum. He closed the app. He opened it again. He closed it for real. By noon, the front gate had acquired a crowd. Not massive. Enough to alter air pressure. 2 news vans, 3 independent creators with handheld gimbals like stems for mechanical lilies, a neighbor who wanted to be outraged about traffic, and a woman from a local domestic workers union holding a hand-painted sign, "Pay US like we save lives." Security kept them on the sidewalk, water bottles delivered per orders. The cameras rolled anyway. Commenters cheered the water delivery. Commenters said it was a bribe. The truth stood in the heat and drank. "Would you like me to relocate Ms. Brooks to a safe house?" the security chief asked. "She's safe here," Grant said. The chief inclined his head. "Yes, sir. Safer if she isn't asked to leave." The chief had worked long enough to know that safety has little to do with walls and a lot to do with dignity. By late afternoon, a talk show called. Then another. A documentary producer emailed a paragraph that felt like a contract written with exclamation points. A billionaire friend sent a text like a prayer. "Crisis sucks. Get ahead of it. Cash is language." An activist friend of a friend wrote, "Please don't make her a symbol. She's a person first." Grant asked Claire to set the phone to do not disturb, and for first time in years, meant it. At 4, he surprised Eleanor by knocking on the doorframe of the playroom. "Can I join the coloring?" Lila, who had invented monarchy and was magnanimous in her rule, said, "Yes, but you have to follow the palette." "What is ce palette?" "Sky blue, grass green, Miss Ellie Brown, Daddy Gray." She grinned to show it was a joke that still told the truth. Grant took a crayon, and under her watch, drew a lopsided stick figure with a tie that made no sense on a swing set. Lila added a sun. Eleanor added a second sun, small and subtle, tucked near the horizon, because sometimes light comes from unexpected angles. When Lila wandered off to build a fort out of blankets that looked like expensive clouds, Grant turned to Eleanor. "May I ask you something?" "You may ask. Do you want me to hold a press conference to say thank you?" "I want you to look at your daughter with your whole face," she said. "I want you to make yourself available for the boring parts. I want you to stop outsourcing presents." He absorbed the truest thing in the room. "Done," he said, and then had the decency to add, "Working on it." She nodded, approving of the amendment. He hesitated. "I also want to see your world. If you'll let me." "My world?" "Where you live. Your street. Your church. Miss Ruth's kitchen. The place that built you into someone who could do what you did yesterday." He tried to smile. "I have a feeling none of those places have ring lights." Eleanor considered the request. It was not a small thing. Wealth often wants to be let in as a tourist, to look, to feel moved, to go home unchanged. She weighed him. "Tomorrow," she said, "if Miss Ruth says yes. If you come without an entourage. If you listen more than you talk." He nodded like a student who had finally figured out the class was pass/fail, and the test was kindness. Tomorrow. Evening bent over the city, and the city bent back with skyscraper sighs. The internet kept screaming and kissing and opining without ever brushing its teeth. The Hollister house ate chicken and rice. The Hollister house did bath time. The Hollister house read 2 chapters and then a third because the second ended on a cliff. When Lila slept, Miss Ruth pulled Eleanor into the kitchen and applied a mother's inventory again. Water, pain reliever, affectionate scolding. "You always make yourself into a wall," she said, tapping her daughter's shoulder. "Walls need rest, too." "I know," Eleanor said. And then, softer, he asked to see our world. Miss Ruth raised a single eyebrow, an instrument that had punished and saved many souls. "Did he now?" He looked like he meant it. Men always look like they mean it when there's a camera pointed. "Did you turn the cameras off?" "I think he turned one off himself." Miss Ruth's mouth did an acknowledging thing. "Tomorrow, then. I'll make cornbread. And rules." "What rules?" "The ones that keep people from using our kitchen as a confessional without washing the dishes." Eleanor laughed, the sound loosening something in her chest. "Yes, ma'am." At 10 p.m., the video landed on the feed of a man named Marcus Delroy, who sat in a one-bedroom apartment 7 miles away. He watched himself as a blur in the corner of the frame, saw his hand reach, saw the woman block, saw the plan fall apart like a cheap chair. He flinched at the sight of the syringe rolling across concrete and remembered the sting of humiliation like a secondary wound. He turned off his phone and pressed a palm to his eyes until stars appeared. He wasn't the leader of that crew. He hadn't written the plan. He had been laid off last year with a severance that had looked like mercy until rent and his mother's medical bills ate it like candy. He had told himself a story about the rich and what they could spare. The story had changed shape mid-sentence, and now here he was, a man hiding in the narrative he had helped make. The news said someone recognized the SUV. The news said arrests might be imminent. The news said the nanny was brave. Marcus had a feeling the news would say his name soon, and not the way a mother says it. He thought about his mother's breath. He thought about bills. He thought about the CEO whose name was on the letter that had ended his job. He thought about the little girl's yellow jacket. He thought about the woman's eyes when she said no. He thought about going to the police, and did not. He thought about running, and did not. He sat very still with the terrible thing he had done, and the terrible things that had made it possible. The internet did not know him. It would soon pretend to. The next morning dawned with 2 promises, a neighborhood visit and a statement. Claire brought the copy to the kitchen, where Grant had learned how to look almost competent with a coffee maker. 3 sentences, she said, almost proud. No adjectives. No legalese. He read, "Yesterday, my daughter was nearly taken from us. Eleanor Brooks put her body between danger and my child. I wasn't there. I will be now. We are grateful beyond words, and we will show that gratitude in how we live, not in what we post." He exhaled. Good. Do you want to add anything about compensation? Claire asked, gaze careful. No, he said. Not yet. Not like that. He thought of checks that looked like apologies. He thought of strings. If we do it privately. And we listen first. Claire's face softened by a millimeter. All right. They posted the statement from his company and his personal account because the world now expects contrition to arrive on 2 channels. The responses were predictably split. Some called it humble. Some called it scripted. Some called it too late. Some called it something they'd been waiting to hear from any man with money. For once, Grant didn't read most of them. He drove the 3 of them in the same nondescript sedan as the Park Day. No convoy, no security SUV, just a father, a child, and a woman who knew the turns without a GPS. The city changed texture as they left manicured avenues and entered blocks where porches were churches and stoops were therapy. Corner stores with names painted by hand. Murals that tutored the sky in brightness. Sidewalks learning to hold the weight of history with grace. Roll the window down, Miss Ruth had told him on the phone. Smell the place before you try to speak about it. He did as instructed. He smelled cooked onions, hot tar, a sweet from a bakery that did not advertise, and the communal musk of people who carry their days openly. They parked in front of a building whose paint had peeled in aesthetic agreement with time. A group of men played dominoes at a folding table, their laughter a rhythm. A girl jumped double dutch with a concentration that could power a small city. Someone called, Ellie, and then 3 more someones. Eleanor's world announced itself not with press, but with presence. Miss Ruth opened the door before they knocked. You're late, she said, and smiled with every part of her face. Grant held out flowers he'd stopped to buy, the slightly wrong grocery store kind that do their best. These are for you, he said, and for the kitchen. Miss Ruth took them, sniffed them, approved them, and then looked behind him. Where is the rest of your life? No entourage, she said. That was a rule. Good, she said and stepped aside. Come in and learn. Inside, the apartment was small the way a heart is small. It held everything it needed to. Family pictures grinned from crooked frames. A crocheted blanket told a weather report of warm. A Bible sat with a grocery list tucked between psalms and paper towels. The kitchen was the size of a confession, and they all fit. Miss Ruth tied on an apron with the confidence of a general. You will chop, she told Grant, handing him an onion and a knife with the blade of consequences. And you will talk. And you will listen. Lila climbed onto a chair like a throne. I will taste. You will blow on the cornbread so it don't burn your tongue, Miss Ruth said. Eleanor babysat. You are under orders. Eleanor sat and relaxed into a chair that had known her shape since before she learned to spell her name. She watched Grant peel an onion like a man who had never been asked to cry in a kitchen. He did not do it well. He did it earnestly. Between slices, Miss Ruth asked questions like a kindly cross-examiner. When did you last eat with your child without checking an email? Before yesterday? He thought. The knife slowed. I don't know. When did you last miss a bedtime and tell yourself it was for her future? He swallowed. Most nights, he said. Until now. When did you last say your late wife's name out loud? He bowed his head slightly, onion and grief sharing a sting. Camille, he said, the syllables a small resurrection. Miss Ruth nodded, satisfied. Good. Say it in your house sometimes. The dead like to be invited back, kindly, when memory knocks. Otherwise they haunt. Eleanor locked eyes with her mother in gratitude and warning, not too much. But Miss Ruth had a different syllabus for the day. And now, she said, setting a cast-iron skillet on the burner, like punctuation, what are you going to do about the people whose names aren't trending? Grant paused. The onion, the heat, the room bent his posture into honesty. I don't know yet, he said again, taking the risk of not knowing. I know that whatever I do will be looked at as performance and penance. I know that I can live with that if the result is real. I know that a woman who works for me saved my daughter because she's a good person, not because of my policies. I know my company has layoffs that read like spreadsheets and land like earthquakes. I know the men who tried to take my daughter weren't born that way. Good, Miss Ruth said. Keep that knowing away from your Instagram and bring it to your boardroom. He nodded. He would. The cornbread came out like a smell remembered from a childhood he hadn't had. They ate at a table that had seen bills and birthdays. Conversation braided, neighbors dropping by to kiss Eleanor's head and scold her for scaring them, Lila announcing plans to teach the statue game in case anyone needed it, Grant asking a man named Deshawn about the youth center's broken AC and getting a to-the-dollar answer. "Don't you go guessing," Miss Ruth warned when he reached for his wallet. "You let the people who live here decide how they want help, and you don't put your name on the ceiling after." "Yes, ma'am," he said again, and it sounded less like performance each time. When they left, the domino men saluted with 2 fingers and a smile. The girl with the jump rope offered Lila a turn, and Lila's laugh joined the block like a small bird finding its choir. Grant stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the window where Miss Ruth's plant sat regal and ordinary. He felt the distance between this street and his gatehouse like the length of a book he'd never read because someone had told him the ending. In the car, Lila fell asleep with her mouth open, the day's peace knocking her out cold. Eleanor watched her, then looked at Grant. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Not everyone who says they will does." "Thank you for letting me," he replied. He chose a sentence without a check inside it. "I'd like to come again, with less supervision." He smiled at his own joke and earned her small smile back. When they reached the estate, the crowd had thinned because the story had found new air to breathe somewhere else. A single photographer still waited, a freelancer who had stayed on instinct and hope. She raised her camera, then lowered it when she saw Lila asleep. She put a hand over her heart and mouthed, "Sorry." Eleanor nodded once in thanks. Gates opened. Gates closed. That night, after bedtime and dishes, after Miss Ruth shooed Eleanor to the couch for another hour of prescribed rest, Grant stood alone in his study, the portrait of Camille catching lamplight. He spoke to the room without knowing whether the room needed it. "She saved our daughter," he said, "and now the world is watching what I do after." He reached for his phone and gave himself a rule: 5 minutes to read, then no more. He scrolled past strangers' narratives about what he should do, past cynical hot takes and earnest essays, past a pundit who pronounced Eleanor's name wrong 3 times and then praised her heroism, like a tip. He stopped on a video of domestic workers in a different city holding candles and chanting words that were not his: "We keep your homes. Keep our dignity." He pressed the phone to his chest and let that be his prayer. In the quiet, with the internet still boiling somewhere he couldn't hear it, he drafted a message to Claire that started with, "We need to meet with HR. Real numbers. Real benefits. Not a task force. A change." He deleted and rewrote until it sounded less like a press release and more like a plan. He was, as Eleanor had instructed, starting with tonight. By the next morning, the internet's attention had learned to 2-track. It could keep loving Eleanor while also moving on to the next scandal. The hashtags still trended, but softer. The morning shows had moved from hero nanny to the cost of childcare to summer storm prep in a cycle that absorbed and forgot. But the people in the story did not forget. The police called with an update. They had a lead on the SUV. "We're following procedure," the detective said, his voice trained to be steady for bad news days and good news days alike. "We'll keep you informed." "Thank you," Grant said. He meant it. He also heard a different sentence beneath it: "Watch what vengeance asks for. Watch what justice requires." He hung up and found Eleanor in the sunroom teaching Lila how to count beats between lightning and thunder in a book. "It tells you how far away the storm is," Eleanor explained. "The closer the numbers, the closer the rain." Grant leaned against the doorframe. "The police have a lead." Eleanor's face didn't move. "I figured they would." She closed the book and looked up. "Storm's still coming." He understood her tense. He nodded. He sat on the rug and let a 6-year-old rearrange his tie like a kite string. He looked at Eleanor over Lila's head. "May I tell you something without it sounding like a strategy?" "You can try." "I don't know how to fix the internet. I don't know how to fix an old system in 1 quarter. But I can fix a calendar. I can put my daughter's name on it like a meeting I won't miss. I can fix a bedtime." She considered him for a long beat. "Fix dinner, too," she said. "Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is eat with your family when you could be anywhere else." "Dinner," he repeated. "Radical. And when the other storm comes, the one with arrests and headlines, remember that what you do afterward will tell Lila who you think the bad guys are." He absorbed the syllabus for ACT for like a man taking notes for an exam he intends to pass. Understood. Outside, the sky put on a gray dress and thought about rain. Inside, the 3 of them began to practice an ordinary that could hold the extraordinary. The internet, for once, could wait. And because stories like to fold time, the scene cuts briefly to a conference room at Hollister Corporation. A screen glows. HR staff gathers, notepads ready, their faces creased by years of language that braided care with cost. Grant walks in without the usual entourage. He looks at the chairs and chooses the one that makes him level with the tallest critic, not higher. He doesn't clear his throat, because he is not an announcement. He speaks like a man who learned to say a dead woman's name again in a kitchen where cornbread cooled. We're going to audit our lowest paid roles, he says. We're going to listen before we change. But we are going to change. I don't want a committee. I want a timeline. This is not about optics. If you use that word in this meeting, you can leave. Someone tests him. What about shareholder? Shareholders don't raise my child, he says. My employees do. We do. And some of those employees go home to kids who need star pancakes, too. Let's start there. Silence, then the sound of pens that have waited a while flashing their points. Relief makes a faint sound, like a tin condenting back into shape. He knows one act does not a redemption make. He knows the internet will call this performative. He knows performative can get you to the real if you don't stop at the mirror. He knows he has to walk this all the way through. He thinks of Eleanor's sentence, start with tonight. He writes it on the whiteboard, a CEO vandalizing his own meeting with a promise that can be checked later. Evening comes with rain stitched into it. Lila stands at the window, counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, until the thunder answers back. Grant joins her and learns the tempo. Eleanor leans on the couch, the ache in her head now a polite guest instead of a loud one. On the coffee table, Claire's phone buzzes and buzzes where she left it, full of producers offering seats and lines. Claire has gone home for the first time in 2 days to a dog who thinks she is a hero for walking in the door. She will return tomorrow with revised plans and a new set of boundaries because her client said please and meant it. Miss Ruth calls. Did you eat? We did, Eleanor says. We made radical dinner. You keep being radical. A pause. I'm proud of you, Ellie. Not for what you did at the park. I was already proud. For what you did after. Eleanor closes her eyes. She lets the words land and stay. Outside, rain begins in earnest. Inside, bedtime proceeds with its ancient choreography. Bath, pajama, story, light click, arms. Lila does the statue game one last time in the dark and then falls asleep with the soft surrender of the day's small victories. Eleanor stands with her hand on the doorframe, head tilted in habit. Grant stands beside her. The storm makes a drumline on the windows. They listen to it together. What happens next? Grant asks, honest and a little afraid. Act 3, Eleanor says, and her mouth quirks with irony and prophecy. You're going to try to say thank you the way men like you say it. You're going to think generosity is a cure for guilt. The world will clap. I will not. He winces, but there is gratitude in it. I suppose I deserve that. You deserve instruction, she says. You could decide whether to follow it. Down the hall, the house breathes. Somewhere in the city, a police radio crackles. Somewhere else, Marcus Delroy thinks about turning himself in, and does not yet. A hashtag dims. A kitchen holds the smell of onion and plans. A portrait keeps watch over a man relearning how to be a father. The viral divide has done its work. It has split the world into a before and an after, a headline and a home, a press strategy and a promise. Now the story sharpens its next blade, not to wound, but to cut open the assumption that money can buy the right shape of gratitude. Morning arrived like an apology that didn't quite know where to land. The storm had scrubbed the city's face. The sky was rinsed and earnest. In the Hollister estate, breakfast had the quiet competence of a kitchen that had learned new choreography. Grant cracked eggs without Googling. Lila narrated the migration of blueberries from bowl to batter, and Eleanor sipped tea, with her eyes half closed, listening to a house try to be softer than its square footage. It might have stayed that way, a tender ordinary, if not for the email that arrived wearing a tuxedo. Claire's subject line, gratitude plan discreet. Grant read it once, then again, mouth settling into a shape that meant he thought he'd found a bridge over a moral canyon. The plan was simple the way a thunderclap is simple. A private wire transfer of $5 million to Eleanor Brooks. A deed to a brownstone near her mother's apartment, fully renovated, no mortgage, no property taxes for 10 years, covered by a trust. A scholarship in Eleanor's name at 2 local colleges for domestic workers' children. A press not release, nothing public, unless it leaked, in which case they would decline to comment with grace. He felt, for a minute, the easing that a very large number provides. Money is a morphine that talks. It says, you did a bad thing. Here is a good thing fast enough to make the bad things echo quieter. He looked up from the screen. In the sunroom, Lila was teaching Eleanor how to draw a cat whose head was definitely too large, and Eleanor was pretending to need the lesson. Grant watched the woman who had made herself into a shield for his daughter and thought, not for the first time, that money was both too much and never enough. Still, he signed the transfer forms. He called his lawyer. He approved the trust. He moved like a man who believes in the authority of numbers to build a bridge he could not cross any other way. He told himself it was gratitude. He did not ask who it served. By noon, the wire had left his bank like a sleek fish and arrived in Eleanor's account with a splash she could not ignore. Her phone pinged once politely, as if it knew it was ring-bearing and wanted to be modest. She looked at the screen and felt the world sway. Plus 5 million.00, incoming wire, Hollister Family Foundation. Memo, for everything we can't repay. Her thumb hovered over the number, as if it could bruise. She set the phone face down and breathed out. Miss Ruth's voice came to her like a compass. Call a thing what it is, baby, or it'll call itself, and you won't like the name. This wasn't a tip. This wasn't a thank you. This was a narrative trying to buy new clothes. She went to find him. Grant was in his study, sleeves rolled up, spreadsheets open like obedient soldiers. He looked up with a smile that did not know it was about to be torn into two equal halves. Eleanor, he said, hopeful. I know, she said softly. She put the phone on his desk between him and the portrait of Camille. You can't do this. He blinked. The old him surfaced, incredulous, injured. Can't do what? Wire me a number big enough to make the internet clap, she said. Buy me a house with my name on the deed and yours on the headline. Dress your guilt in generosity. His face changed color the way skies do before a storm decides whether to ruin a picnic. That's not what this is. Is exactly what this is, she said, not unkindly, not loudly. And it's exactly why it won't do what you hope it will. He stood. I'm trying, he said, and the sentence was both true and insufficient. I'm trying to make something right. Then make something right where you broke it, she said. In your calendar. In your company. In your habits. Not in my account. I can do both, he insisted. I can do all of it. You can, she allowed, but not like this. Not without asking me who I am in this story. Not without letting me decide what gratitude looks like in my world, not in yours. He looked down at the phone as if the number might argue on his behalf. He picked it up. It's anonymous, he said weakly. She nearly laughed. There is no such thing as anonymous at your level. And even if no one ever found out, I would. I would know that you tried to turn a moment of truth into a transaction. And I would live in a house that someone could call a debt. He swallowed. It's a gift. It's a leash, she said, and the room went very quiet. He sat back down because standing made his arguments tall, and she had just made them small. What would you have me do? He meant it like a test. He meant it like a plea. Listen, she said, then wait. Then ask. To what end? To the end where gratitude doesn't make a hero into a prop, she said. To the end where my daughter, she nodded toward the hallway, where Lila's laughter was a ribbon, grows up knowing that when someone saves you, you don't toss money at them to save you from the work. He closed his eyes, and it was a relief not to see the number on the desk. Return it then, he whispered, the words a dare and a self-punishment. If you must. She shook her head. You will return it. Publicly. He stared. Publicly. If this transfer leaks, and it will, you will look like a man who tried to pay a woman off. If it doesn't leak, I will look like a woman who took your guilt in exchange for her story. She held his gaze steady as a level. The only way through is daylight. He felt the sudden cold of a world without the one tool he trusted most. Daylight, he repeated. Daylight, she said, with your mouth, not your press release. He exhaled through something that sounded like surrender and sounded like growing. All right. By 3, the leak arrived right on schedule wearing the trench coat of a source familiar with the transaction. A financial gossip site posted a blocky headline, Billionaire gifts hero Nanny 5M and house, classy or cringe. The word cringe did what it always does. It set the internet on fire and pretended it was immoral. Comments galloped. Pay her queen. Gross hush money. At least he did something. This is why power feels entitled to our bodies. Where do I apply to be a nanny? Imagine needing a near tragedy to learn gratitude. In the sunroom, Lila built a tower of blocks so tall it forgot to be stable. It wobbled and held. She whispered, stay. Eleanor watched the tower and thought of men who tell gifts to stay steady when their foundations are wrong. Miss Ruth called with the calm of a fire captain. Baby, it's out. I know. Do what you said you'd do. I will. And keep your coat on, Miss Ruth added. The weather's about to turn. At 4, they stepped outside the front door together. Eleanor in a navy coat, hair wrapped, eyes bright. Grant in a sweater that made him look a little less like an announcement. Lila's hand in Eleanor's, because the world can wait while you hold what matters. Claire hovered in the background with no microphone, because this wasn't that kind of thing. A few cameras clicked. The freelancer who had stayed yesterday was here again, eyes kind and lens clean. A local union rep stood at the sidewalk, chin lifted, sign tucked under her arm in respect. A neighbor peered from behind a hydrangea with the full power of HOA curiosity. Grant spoke first, per Eleanor's instruction, but he kept it to the bones. I authorized a transfer to Ms. Brooks this morning, he said. Eleanor asked me to return it. She's right. I am returning it. I was trying to say thank you with money because money is the language I know. I'm learning other languages. A reporter blinked. So, you aren't giving her anything? Eleanor stepped forward. He's giving me respect, she said. He's giving his daughter time. Those are worth more than money. And if you need a number, you're missing the novel. But you risked your life, another said. Don't you deserve? I deserve a future where the people who raise other people's kids can afford to raise their own, she said. I deserve a world where my mother's rent doesn't go up because a rich man put his gratitude in market. I deserve not to be used as a symbol to absolve or indict him. I deserve to set the terms of my story. Silence followed the sentences like they dropped something heavy, and everyone was waiting to hear if it would break. It didn't. It settled sturdy. A hand went up in the back, unexpected. The freelancer with the kind eyes. Ms. Brooks, what would help? Eleanor considered the question because it was the only one that mattered. He can help by being a father, she said, nodding to Lila. By changing the way his company treats the people at the bottom of the ladder. By listening to the workers who clean his office and build his apps. By funding the union if they ask him to and shutting up if they don't. As for me, she smiled, small and private. Make sure I have PTO when I get a concussion saving somebody's baby. Light laughter, the good kind that oils hard truths so they don't tear on the way in. Grant cleared his throat. She will, he said. They will. He gestured vaguely toward a future HR meeting he had already scheduled. We will. The union rep lifted her sign again, pay US like we save lives, and tipped it once like a toast. The cameras captured the moment and did, miraculously, a decent thing. They did not try to turn it into a spectacle. They simply bore witness. They went back inside together with the odd feeling that comes when you choose a harder road in public and the ground, instead of punishing you, feels firmer. The internet, predictably, split into flavors. One corner called Eleanor ungrateful. Another called her a saint. Another said both were lazy words used to avoid policies. Among the noise, a thread caught fire for a better reason, domestic workers sharing stories of gifts. After I stayed all weekend with their sick kids, they gave me an iPad. I sold it to pay rent. My boss paid for my Uber every day for a month, then fired me when I asked for health insurance. They bought me a coat once. What I needed was a contract. Eleanor didn't read them, but she felt the hum in the air like a chorus practicing 2 blocks over. Miss Ruth read them and sent one screenshot, no caption. Eleanor looked at it, nodded once, and put her phone down. She had laundry to fold. In the study, Grant's eyes were red. Not the theatrical red of a man who cries for an audience, but the private red of someone discovering that money is a poor translator for love. He sat alone for a minute longer than a man like him usually allows, then went to find his daughter. Lila was in the hallway, building a fort from dining chairs and the good sheets. Daddy, she announced, this is the safe cave. You have to be small to fit. He crouched. I can be small. Smaller. He got on his hands and knees and crawled inside, a billionaire reduced to the right size. Eleanor watched from the doorway and let the scene wash a little of the heat from her ribcage. Inside the safe cave, Lila whispered, everyone's been looking at us. Yes, he said. Do we have to look back? Only at the ones who need us to. Who needs us to? He thought about the union sign, about a man named Deshawn's exact AC budget, about the HR meeting with a whiteboard that now said start with tonight, and beneath it, start with payroll. He put his hand on his daughter's head and told the true answer. Miss Ellie. Mama Ruth. The people at my work who make everything work. You. Me. Okay, she said, as if he had finally passed the easiest test. He crawled out and stood, pulling the sheet back into order with an apology that would have made Camille laugh. He found Eleanor's eyes. "I'm sorry." "For the wire?" she asked. "For the habit," he said. "For reaching for the lever I know best. For believing the only way to show value is to assign a number." She exhaled. "Apology accepted." A beat. "Stay with it." "I will." He did not hug her because this wasn't a movie where apologies end in embraces. He went to the kitchen and started dinner because radical is a recipe you practice until your hands remember it without instruction. And then, because Act 3 likes to prove its thesis, the world sent the backlash. By evening, a podcast with a neon logo and 1 million listeners uploaded an episode titled, "Ungrateful, When Good Deeds Aren't Good Enough." The host's voice had the smug polish of a man who is paid to be unkind in clever ways. He mispronounced Eleanor's name twice, and then did it correctly the third time, as if that fixed anything. Callers chimed in. "If someone gave me $5 million, I wouldn't complain." This is what happens when you try to please the mob. Class warfare bro classic. Another corner of the internet pushed back, loud and precise. When a person says no to a gift, listen. She told you what she needs. The ungrateful trope is just patriarchy holding hands with capitalism. If you think 5M fixes what's broken, your imagination is cheap. Claire texted Grant to ask if they should respond. He typed no. "We cooked dinner." Then, because he was learning, he put his phone in a drawer and set a timer for an hour. The hour passed over pasta and tomatoes. Eleanor salted with the authority of someone who has fed grief. Lila grated cheese with the concentration of a scientist. They ate at the table for the third night in a row, which is how streaks begin. After, dishes clinked with the music of duty done kindly. Eleanor leaned on the counter, a hand pressed to her side where the bruise bloomed private colors. "It still hurts," she admitted. Grant didn't offer a remedy. "Where?" She placed her palm flat on the tender place, and then moved it to her temple. "Here. And here." She tapped her chest, then lightly. "And here." He nodded. "We can't fix all three tonight." "No," she agreed. "But we can make tea." He did, badly, and she rescued it with honey and the right steep time. They sat with their cups like citizens around a small fire, letting the day's cold burn off in slow circles. "Tomorrow," he said, because men like him love tomorrows, "I meet with HR. I'll ask them for real numbers, not optics. I'll talk to the board about a floor wage adjustment." Don't announce to me," she said gently. "Do it. Then let me hear about it from someone who isn't paid to care what I think." He closed his mouth. He opened it again for a better sentence. "Do you want me to take the morning school run?" He looked almost shy. "Alone?" She blinked. The ask was right-sized, specific, an act, not a statement. "Yes," she said. "Pack her snack yourself. Not the packaged ones. Cut the apples so it doesn't brown." "How?" "With lemon," she said. "And with love." He smiled, small and real. "I can do that." Night came in careful steps. Lila fell asleep mid-sentence. The house exhaled. Eleanor stood alone for a moment in the hallway and let herself feel proud and scared at once. It is hard to say no to big money. It is harder when the world tells you your no is arrogance. She had said it anyway. She had asked for arms and policy, not diamonds. She had pointed a man toward the actual work. In the guest room, she checked her phone one last time. A DM waited from a handle she didn't know, a private message that would usually live in the fog, with strange thorns. She opened it and found a sentence that made her sit down. "I'm sorry." Another bubble. "I'm the one who grabbed for the girl. I'm turning myself in tomorrow. I saw your eyes. You said no like my mother would have. I don't know if this helps. I'm sorry." Signed, M. Her breath left her in a shape she didn't recognize. She stared at the screen until the letters blurred into a river. Then she took a screenshot, because the world makes receipts out of repentance. She sat with the knowledge that the story's villain had a mother, that his apology did not erase harm, that it mattered and didn't in the same second. She typed nothing back. She sent the image to Claire with a note, for the detective. Quietly. Then she set the phone screen down, as if turning her back on a confession she could not absolve. In his study, Grant stared at a different screen, a spreadsheet bent into a promise. Minimums pushed up. Benefits expanded. A line item called Emergency Fund, hourly staff created from nothing, but will. He wrote an email to the board that started, "We have been underpaying the people we rely on. This is not a PR line. Is math plus morality." He expected a fight. He felt ready for one. He closed the laptop and walked to the doorway of his daughter's room. Eleanor stood there already, the two of them forming a bracket around a sleeping child. "Tomorrow I cut an apple," he whispered. "Tomorrow I let you," she answered. They stood in that gentle, newly radical quiet until the floorboards told them to go to bed. Morning cracked an egg over the horizon. In the kitchen, Grant found a lemon, learned the angle of a knife that makes wedges without waste, and cut an apple into moons that would not brown. He tucked them into a container with a small square of paper on top, a star drawn by a father who was no artist and all in. Lila came in with bedhead and a smile. "Snack." "Prepared," he said, presenting it like a trophy won by showing up. Eleanor watched, arms crossed, a smile she kept for herself and for Miss Ruth later. She felt something unclench. Money had not solved the world last night, but a man had learned to slice fruit. Sometimes the revolution starts with kindergarten. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Claire. "Detective has the DM. Thank you. No leaks." Another from an unknown number with a different tone. Marcus Delroy turned himself in. She closed her eyes. The story tightened its focus, preparing for its next hard act. But for now, she tucked the news into the pocket where she kept weather reports. They had a school run to make. At the door, Lila looked up at Eleanor, and then at her father. "Which car?" she asked, as if this were the only politics that mattered. "Ours," Eleanor said. "Mine," Grant corrected, then corrected himself with a grin that surprised him. "Yours," he told his daughter. "The one with the window that sticks unless you talk nice to it." In the driveway, sunlight pooled like loose change. They buckled in. The radio stayed off. The gate opened, and the day let them pass. Behind them, a wire transfer sat in a bank, reversed, a line item that would someday teach someone in accounting about a day when money lost a vote. Ahead of them, a courtroom waited, and a boardroom, and a kitchen where cornbread might be made again. Act 3 had done its work. It had offered the easy gift, then asked for the hard one. It had put a check in a trembling hand, and watched that hand close before the ink dried. It had offended the world to teach it something truer than applause, that gratitude isn't payment, it's practice. And in the rear-view mirror, a child ate lemon-sweet apple moons cut by a father who finally understood the shape of after. The morning broke with the sound of a phone that didn't want to ring, but had to. Grant's screen lit up, Detective Moreno. He answered before the second vibration. "Mr. Hollister," the detective said, voice steady as habit. "We've taken Marcus Delroy into custody. He came in on his own." Grant froze. He turned himself in. "Yes, sir." Said he couldn't sleep. Said he needed to face the people he hurt. Grant's eyes flicked toward the kitchen. Eleanor was slicing fruit for Lila's lunch, humming something soft. The air smelled like oranges and resolve. "Will there be a trial?" "There has to be," the detective said. "But he's already talking. Not fighting it. He's," a pause, "not what we expected." Grant stared at the countertop, its shine suddenly offensive. "I'd like to be there." "You'll be called as a witness," Moreno said. "So will Ms. Brooks." That afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch steps with Miss Ruth, phone in hand, reading the same message Grant had received. "He turned himself in," she said quietly. Miss Ruth nodded, stirring her tea. "The Lord works on people when sleep won't." "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." "You ain't supposed to feel anything tidy," Miss Ruth said. "Forgiveness ain't a door. It's a road. Sometimes you walk it barefoot." Eleanor watched him stumble between flowers. "I don't want him to rot. I want him to understand." Miss Ruth smiled the kind of smile that knows cost. "Then you already do forgive him. You just haven't told your fear yet." The courthouse smelled like metal and air conditioning. News vans waited outside like patient vultures. Cameras didn't flash. They hovered, respectful now, cautious after Act 3's lesson. Eleanor wore her Sunday best, navy again because courage likes consistency. Grant walked beside her in a suit without arrogance. Lila stayed home, drawing hearts with crooked edges. Inside, the defendant sat small behind glass partition. Marcus Delroy, 33. Skin like overworked soil. Hands rough, jaw tight. He looked like a man trying not to look like man. The judge spoke, but Eleanor didn't hear the legal words at first: charges, plea, testimony. She was watching Marcus's hands. They trembled, not from fear, but from memory. The prosecutor laid out the facts: attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, possession of a controlled substance. The defense attorney countered with the biography of poverty. Layoffs, medical debt, desperation turned into a weapon that misfired. When Eleanor's name was called, the room breathed in. She stepped up, hand on Bible, voice steady. "Ms. Brooks," the prosecutor said, "can you tell the court what you remember?" She nodded. "I remember a man who looked at a child and saw an opportunity. I remember fear. And I remember what fear looks like when it's tired of itself." Her eyes flicked toward Marcus. "But I also remember the look he had when he turned to run. It wasn't evil. It was lost." The courtroom stilled. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, do you believe the defendant should face punishment?" She took a breath that sounded like prayer. "I believe he should face truth, whatever shape that takes." Her answer didn't fit on a headline, and that made it holy. When Grant's turn came, he didn't read from the notes Claire had helped him write. He folded them in half, then in half again, until they were small enough to pocket. "I was supposed to be at a meeting that morning," he said, "to talk about numbers that don't matter anymore. And this man," he gestured to Marcus, "taught me a truth I would have paid not to learn, that walls don't make safety. People do." He paused. "I can't excuse what he did, but I can understand why he thought the world owed him something. Because for years, I lived like it owed me everything." The defense attorney blinked. The judge leaned back, studying him with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for miracles. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first word. "I didn't plan to hurt nobody," he said. "We were supposed to grab, scare, get the ransom, go. That's how they told it. But when she," his eyes found Eleanor, "stood there, I saw my mama. I saw what I lost trying to feed what's broken in this country." Tears didn't fall, but they were present, unshed witnesses. "I can't ask forgiveness," he said, "but I can ask to make something out of the time I got left. Maybe a job, maybe a letter to my kid." The judge nodded once. "I can't give you mercy for free," he said, "but I can acknowledge the beginning of repentance." Weeks passed. Sentencing came and went. 10 years, with the possibility of rehabilitation work release. The tabloids called it lenient. The talk shows called it soft justice. But the people who mattered, the ones who had been in that courtroom, called it enough. Grant visited the facility once, not for publicity, but because he needed to see closure in motion. He brought paperwork, not flowers, an employment training program under Hollister Corporation for released offenders, modeled after something Eleanor had suggested over tea. Marcus stared at him through the visiting glass. "You don't have to do this," he said. Grant shook his head. "Neither did you when you walked in that day." A silence grew, wide and real. Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. Grant hesitated, then mirrored it. For a second, money, guilt, and class disappeared. There were only two fathers separated by decisions in glass. At home, Eleanor sat with Miss Ruth and Lila, folding brochures for the SHIELD project, Grant's foundation, now redefined at her insistence. It wasn't a vanity brand. It was a network, funding domestic worker protections, mental health support, and legal aid. The first clause of its charter was in Eleanor's handwriting, because safety is not a product. It's a person. Miss Ruth read it aloud, smiling. "That'll preach." Eleanor laughed softly. Maybe it already did. Across the room, Grant was on the floor helping Lila build another fort, smaller this time, more stable. He had learned to tape the sheets tighter, to let the child lead. Eleanor watched the two of them and whispered, "Maybe we're all just learning to build better shelters." Miss Ruth squeezed her hand. "Some people use bricks. Some use grace." The next day, Grant stood at a podium, not a press event, but a community town hall. There were no teleprompters. The same freelance photographer who had stayed outside the gate was there, camera quiet. "I once thought gratitude was measured in dollars," Grant began. "Then I met a woman who taught me that gratitude without accountability is just decoration." He gestured to Eleanor in the front row. "I can't pay back what I owe her, but I can pay it forward. The SHIELD project isn't about me. It's about the invisible hands that hold this world together. The ones who raise our children, clean our floors, calm our storms. We're going to raise wages. We're going to provide legal coverage. We're going to stop pretending care is cheap." The crowd clapped, not like fans, but like witnesses. Eleanor didn't stand. She didn't need to. Her stillness was its own applause. Later that night, under a sky that had forgiven its own clouds, Grant walked out onto the terrace. Eleanor joined him, her scarf fluttering like punctuation. "They printed the foundation charter today," he said quietly. "They wanted to name it after you." She smiled. "And you said?" "I said no. You told me not to." "Good." "What should we name it?" he asked. She thought for a long time, looking toward the city lights where her mother's neighborhood glowed. "Name it after love," she said. That's the only thing that doesn't need PR. He nodded. The words settled like prayer beads. Below them, the city exhaled. Somewhere in a halfway house, Marcus Delroy swept a floor with quiet diligence. Somewhere else, Miss Ruth ladled soup for a church fundraiser. Somewhere smaller but infinite, Lila dreamed of crooked castles and perfect stars. The narration softened to a close. When she shielded his daughter, she saved more than a life. She saved his soul. And sometimes redemption doesn't come from paying back, it comes from showing up. Again and again, until presence becomes proof. The wind lifted, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the kitchen, the kind that doesn't need an audience. The past had returned, but not for vengeance. It had come to teach them how to begin again. They chose a theater instead of a ballroom, a stage instead of a dais. The choice mattered. Ballrooms flatter. Stages confess. Grant stood in the wings with a lapel mic he didn't want and a speech he bled into. Beyond the curtain, employees, community leaders, union organizers, domestic workers with name tags that said their names like crowns. Reporters in the back, pens ready but hushed. The freelance photographer who kept showing up, front row, camera down for now, hands folded like she was at church. Eleanor stood backstage with Lila, one hand in the child's hair, the other steadying the air. Miss Ruth sat in the second row, a paper fan resting in her lap, like a gentle threat. Do right. The producer tapped 3 fingers, ready. Grant glanced toward the portrait of Camille. There wasn't one here, but he had learned to carry her. He breathed and walked into the light. The applause was polite, and then quiet. He did not raise both hands the way men on stages sometimes do when they expect praise. He kept them folded, and let the light find his face before his words did. Good evening, he said. I owe you a beginning. Silence leaned forward. I used to think success was a door you lock behind you, he continued, voice even, unadorned. You get through, you shut it, you feel safe. Then a woman named Eleanor stood between a stranger and my daughter, and I learned that safety isn't a door. It's a person. He swallowed, and the mic caught it. He did not apologize for being human on a microphone. I'm here to do 3 things: to tell the truth, to apologize, and to show what comes after. A screen behind him lit with 3 words: truth. Apology. After. Truth, he said. On the day my daughter was almost taken, I wasn't there. I had outsourced care. I had given my calendar to money, and told my heart it could have what was left. Eleanor held the line my money couldn't. He let the sentence stand without music. The room held it with him. Apology, he said next. Not the kind you buy. Not the kind you post. He glanced down, then up. Eleanor, I'm sorry I tried to repay courage with a wire transfer. I am sorry I made your heroism swim in my guilt. I am sorry I learned your worth from a video the world had to show me. You deserved a present father and a fair employer long before a camera arrived. He turned, found her in the wings, and bowed his head, not low enough to be theater, low enough to be real. Eleanor didn't nod. She didn't need to. Her stillness accepted what was hers and refused what wasn't. And now, he said, after. The screen changed. After. Policies, presence, project. Policies, Grant said. Starting today, Hollister Corporation raises our wage floor by 20. Not as a stunt, permanently. Effective immediately, paid family leave across the board. Emergency funds for hourly staff. Independent grievance counsel that doesn't report to me. He raised a palm to cut applause that began in the back. This is not generosity. This is overdue math. Murmurs like relieved metal. Presence, he said. I will not make promises about my character I haven't earned. So I will offer schedule instead. School drop-off, 3 days a week, mine. Dinner at home, for nights, mine. Gedime, mine. I will miss meetings before I miss my daughter. When you see me do otherwise, you can call me out. Eleanor, you especially. Eleanor's mouth curved with that private candle of a smile. Miss Ruth fanned herself once, approval disguised as climate control. And finally, he said, project. The lights softened. The screen showed a simple white word on black, love. I wanted to name a foundation after Eleanor, Grant said. She told me no. She told me to name it after love. So this is the Love Project. It funds protections for domestic workers, contracts, legal aid, mental health support, safety trainings that aren't empty binders. Is co-governed by domestic workers themselves. I don't share it. Eleanor doesn't either. Miss Ruth told me, don't put your name on the ceiling, so I put love on the door. A laugh in the right places, a hum in the others. The union organizer in the front, Sharp Bob, Sharp Eyes, leaned to the mic at an aisle seat. Does the Love Project back unions? It backs whatever workers ask it to back, Grant said. Including unions, if that's the ask. The board is majority workers, they decide. A ripple of something that felt like trust moved across the room, like a breeze under a tent. And there's one more after, he said quietly. A harder one. I will not seek the harshest sentence for Marcus Delroy. He turned himself in. He asked to build something out of his time. I will show up for the families affected, and I will show up for policies that keep people from falling so far they think ransom is a ladder. He stepped back from the podium and did something that would have embarrassed the man he had been. He asked for help. If I falter, he said, voice softer now, remind me. If I forget, remind me louder. If I turn this into performance, turn off the stage lights. The applause that rose wasn't loud. It was heavy. It came from hands that had folded laundry and cradled babies and cleaned messes made by people who don't know what messes cost. It came with the weight of belonging. He gestured off stage. Eleanor stepped into the light with Lila on her hip. The audience stood on its feet without anyone telling them to. Not a standing ovation, a standing acknowledgement. Grant knelt so his face met his daughter's. You still want to say your line? He asked. Lila nodded, whisper nervous and brave. She reached for the microphone like it was a seashell. Miss Ellie is our shield, she said, voice blowing out a candle and lighting 20. Daddy is learning how. Laughter. Tears. Cameras caught the line, but the line refused to be clipped because the room heard the rest without hearing it, and I am loved by both. Eleanor took the mic like it was a tool, not a trophy. Thank you, she said to the room, then to Grant, then to the workers, for showing up. Let this be the last time we need a viral moment to make a policy move. She turned to the side of the stage where a group of domestic workers stood, hands clasped, eyes bright. If you are a nanny, a housekeeper, a caregiver, this is your project. Bring your lists. Bring your hurt and your ideas. We'll build with them. Miss Ruth stood, fan raised like a verdict. And bring your appetite, she added, laughter rolling like warm bread. Because meetings without food are sins. The room loosened into joy, small, righteous joy, the kind with calluses. After the formalities, the theater became a cafeteria. Folding tables appeared like miracles, cornbread, rice and beans, trays of empanadas, chicken salad made the right way, with too much dill. The photographer moved through the crowd, not hunting moments but catching them gently, a worker comparing contracts with a lawyer, a toddler asleep on a lap, while 3 women wrote a list that would become policy, Grant learning how to wrap foil around leftovers like a human, not a CEO. A young man at the edge of the crowd waited with a careful posture. 21, hat low, nerves loud. When he caught Eleanor's eye, he edged closer. Ms. Brooks. She turned, warmed her face, created a small circle between them. Yes. He pulled a letter from his jacket, creased and recreased. My dad is Marcus. He can't be here. He said to tell you he's in the program now. He wanted to say sorry himself, but they only let him write. He said he prays for your girl. He said he's learning to pray. The young man's throat clicked. He asked me to give you this. Eleanor took the letter with a steadiness she had earned. Tell him I received it, she said. She didn't say I forgive you or I absolve you because that's not how grown forgiveness works. She said, tell him I believe he can build something. And tell him there's cornbread for you. The boy's mouth flickered into something like relief. She filled a plate for him before he could refuse and tucked a second piece of cornbread in a napkin, because mothers train us well. Across the room, Claire approached with a look she wore rarely, unarmored. You were right, she told Grant, nodding toward the working tables. It reads better when it's not reading. It lands. It's heavier than copy, he said, half-smile. It's cornbread. She laughed. Don't quit your day job for metaphors. But, she exhaled, good job. Not yet, he said, turning the phrase into a leash for his ego. Ask me in a year. They looked out at the people building a thing that might actually hold. No VIP rope. No photo booth. Just pens, plates, hands. Night fell with that forgiving hush cities make when they're proud of themselves. Back home, the house felt human in a way only houses that have hosted grief and repair can feel. It carried the smell of starch and citrus and a faint echo of applause tucked into the curtains. Lila fell asleep in the car and stayed asleep on the couch. Grant covered her with the green towel on purpose because rituals mattered. He sat on the floor next to her, tie off, shoes kicked in a careless heap that would have made past Grant wince and present Grant grin. Eleanor stepped onto the terrace with 2 mugs of tea and a question that wasn't small. What are you going to do when the cameras leave? It wasn't a suspicion. It was stewardship. The same thing, he said, but without microphones. He looked at his hands. And when I forget, I'll say your name like a bell, she said, and Miss Ruth will ring a bigger one. They stood side by side, steam rising like thin prayers. The city hummed. The sky wore a thin silver line where tomorrow waited. May I say something else? He asked. You may. Thank you, he said, and let the words not try to be more. She nodded, letting them be just themselves. He hesitated. Camille would have liked you, he offered. She liked people who didn't adjust themselves to her money. Eleanor smiled at the air. I would have liked her right back. They went inside. The house looked ordinary. It was glory. Weeks unfurled. The Love Project hired staff from the community. Its first grants were not sexy. Printers for a workers' center, stipends for childcare so caregivers could attend their own trainings, a lawyer on retainer, so the next nanny with a concussion didn't have to Google her rights. A case manager started a list titled, Small Things That Prevent Big Sorrows. The list grew. At Hollister Corporation, the wage floor lifted lives quietly. An engineer whose mother cleaned houses cried at her desk after reading the memo. She'd watched a company finally acknowledge the hands it couldn't see. HR held listening sessions where employees said un-PowerPoint words like tired and dignity without getting gentle threats in their inboxes later. Grant missed a meeting to attend a first-grade art show. He stood in front of Lila's self-portrait labeled Me and My Shields, 2 figures at her side. The second son, Eleanor's son, hid at the corner of the page, and he noticed because he had learned to look. He took pictures with his phone the way the world had taught him. He put his phone away the way Eleanor had taught him. At bedtime, Lila asked, Is the story done? Eleanor tucked the blanket. Stories like this don't end. They change shape. What shape now? Grant thought of policies and people and cornbread. A circle, he said. A table, Eleanor corrected softly. With enough chairs. Lila nodded, satisfied with geometry that fed people. On a quiet Sunday, they drove to Miss Ruth's church for a dedication. Not for the foundation, not for a building. For a promise. The pews creaked with familiar ghosts. The pastor, a woman with a laugh that scared off despair, invited them to the front. We've heard the headlines, she said, hands open. Now we're going to bless the hard parts, the budgets and the board meetings and the school pickups and the old habits that will try to sneak back in the night. She asked the congregation to lift their hands, not toward the stage, but toward each other. Repeat after me, she said. We will be shields for one another. We will be shields for one another. The echo came, soft then strong. Eleanor felt the words settle in her like armor that doesn't chafe. Grant felt the weight of a vow that had nothing to do with shareholders and everything to do with showing up when texts can't stand in for presence. Miss Ruth leaned in, stage whisper. Don't forget I got a bell. He grinned. I believe you. They laughed in the row, and the laughter couldn't tell if it was love or survival, and decided it was both. After church, the lawn hosted a small riot of folding chairs and plastic cups. Lila ran in figure eights with 2 other kids, arms out like wings. A woman from the union hugged Eleanor and whispered, We got 3 employers to sign contracts this week. You're no made room for our yes. Eleanor squeezed her hand and didn't say, I'm not the reason. She knew enough to share credit like bread. A quiet shape approached, Marcus's mother, hair wrapped in a scarf patterned with sunbursts. She didn't introduce herself. She pressed Eleanor's hands in both of hers and said, Thank you for seeing my boy as a person. I know he did wrong. I know. But thank you. Tears threatened but didn't fall. He says he's reading again. He says he's tired of the man he was. Eleanor hugged her softly, the kind of hug that doesn't erase, only joins. We're tired of him too, she said with gentle humor, and we're rooting for the man he's becoming. Grant stood a few steps away, head bowed, letting the women lead what redemption looks like in public when it's done right, ordinary. That night, the house returned to itself as houses do. The dishwasher hummed like a contented animal. The bookshelf held its breath around a new photograph, Lila between Eleanor and Grant, tongues out at the camera, because dignity requires silliness to keep from becoming a statue. In the study, the portrait of Camille, brought home and rehung in a new place, caught a different light. Grant looked up at her and thought of the sentence he'd said on stage, I wasn't there. I will be now. He had learned to make a schedule, not a slogan. He sat with a pen and wrote a letter to himself with no audience. Remember the day you tried to buy your way out of becoming a father. Remember the day a woman told you no and gave you a life instead. Remember that love is not a product. It's a practice. Practice. He folded it and left it in a drawer he actually opened. He went to Lila's room and found Eleanor at the door listening. They stood there like parentheses around a verse. "Say it," Eleanor murmured, smiling, and he knew which line she meant. He looked at his sleeping daughter and said, not for the first time and not for the last, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." The room accepted it as true. Outside, the city exhaled. At a halfway house, a man finished sweeping and wrote a letter to his son that did not once use the word excuse. At a community center, a new printer spit out contracts that would keep a worker from having to choose between a fever and a paycheck. At Miss Ruth's kitchen, cornbread cooled and a bell rested, metal quiet and ready. The hook of the story, the one that began with terror, returned for its last echo, but now it sounded like a blessing. When masked men snatched his daughter, the nanny didn't hesitate. She stepped between death and innocence. And then the world watched what the billionaire did after, and it didn't find a miracle. It found a man doing the stubborn, holy work of being decent every day until decency became habit.